the opportunity to making this investment in being more intentional about your sales and marketing activities. The people who move on this earlier than others have the opportunity to have a nice technical competitive advantage.
Hi, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Sometimes I talk with people who have very specifically identified areas of expertise, and sometimes those who are creating new areas and experimenting at intersections. Dustin Levy is one of those folks who's doing some really interesting experimentation. Dustin is the vice president of industrial safety business, the industrial safety business group at Gentex Corporation, and he's responsible for a global line of solutions designed to protect people from workplace health and safety hazards. Prior to that, he was the director of product management in the Gentex Aircrew Systems Group, where he led the development of a product management team responsible for the head-borne protection systems for global military and commercial aviation markets. He's worked in R&D and product management, both at Smiths Detection, a leading developer of chemical, biological, radiation, nuclear, and explosive CBRNE for those that like acronyms, detection, and identification systems, where he received their Presidential Achievement Award in 2010. Dustin has a really powerful academic pedigree. In addition to his American Chemical Society certified BS degree, he holds an MBA, a PhD in physical chemistry. He's been a National Institutes of Health predoctoral chemical biology interface research fellow and a National Research Council postdoctoral fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. So I've got a feeling that today we're going to touch on many different topics, from sales channel to buyer's indecision and the Jolt effect and a lot of stuff in between and all around. So settle in and enjoy, and be sure to, to like, share, comment, and share this with people. Give us a review, and please join me in welcoming Dustin. So thanks for spending time with me today, Dustin, and with the audience.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Excited to be here. And Ed, I really appreciate what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's hard for sales and marketing people in industrial and manufacturing companies to find good resources that really focus in on what we do. So I find what you're doing extremely helpful, and glad that
That's kind of you to say. Thank you very much. And hopefully from management all the way down to individual contributors, there's something in every episode for everybody, and tying it all together. And that's really kind of one of the interesting things that I'm so excited to talk to you about, is tying it together, because your career background, your educational background does that. But first, let me put right out on the table a kind of a caveat, if you will. My goal today is to take you in the audience right out to the hairy edge of the learning zone, maybe just bouncing off the panic zone, but stay well out of the comfort zone. So I hope everyone's ready for that. That reference is to one of the things that Dustin omits from his bio, and that's the fact that he's an active public speaker. This past December, he delivered a TEDx talk that explored his concept of these three concentric zones. So start us out by explaining that, Dustin, the comfort, the learning, the panic zone, how that has shaped you, how you shaped that. Obviously, I'll drop that YouTube link into the show notes, but paint us a words picture now and tell us about that.
Yeah, this was something that in an early leadership development course in my first company that we went through. And it's this idea that it's really a learning and development model that says that we're naturally inclined to sit within a comfort zone, the people we know, where we grow up, the safe places. And, we all hear about that need to step out of your comfort zone, but, what does that actually look like? And there is what the model says is right outside of that comfort zone is a learning zone. And that's where you're stretching, being exposed to new things. But further beyond that is a panic zone. And I think what can happen to a lot of people is if they try something new, if they actually go outside the learning zone into the panic zone, your natural response to that is to retreat right back into that safe place. And so as coaches, teachers, mentors, a lot of our job is when we see somebody who is willing to extend themselves, willing to learn, it's working with them to make sure that we're keeping them out of that panic zone. That's a lot of what we need to do as leaders. I think the other interesting thing about this model conceptually is we're you might think that, well, if I stay in my comfort zone, that's a safe place and it will always exist. But the reality is that if you don't invest in growing your comfort zone, it actually gets smaller with time. You take AI as an example, right? If you have a certain type of job and that job is at risk due to AI and you're not engaging with that and learning how to utilize it, your comfort zone is going to shrink over time. And you're going to recognize it in your career when, at some point, your job can now be performed by AI or robotics. That's a very specific example, which is timely for a lot of people who aren't engaging with that technology.
So then, as a leader, coach, and mentor, if the goal is to keep somebody out of the panic zone, but you need them to learn kind of in extremis in certain cases, then what do you have to do? You have to be there with them. You have to figuratively hold their hand. How do you help people make that stretch without them feeling the need to retreat?
Yeah, I mean, it's being a sounding board. It's the way I learn is, I have to experience things on my own. So when I've worked with coaches and mentors, and I continue to work with them, I take a little bit from them and then I go practice it. But I always know that I've got somebody I've got that safety net there. If I need to bounce something off of a mentor, somebody who's been there and experienced it, I know that I have that resource. Some other people need to be, maybe more closely managed. And so as a leader, you have to understand, if you've got a mentee or an employee that you're taking through this process, what's the right level of touch? For me, I need to know that you're there, but I don't need you next to me the entire time. But some other people are different. And that's a lot of what leadership is. It's not one size fits all. It's knowing the individual and what's best for them.
For sure. And a great differentiation between leadership and management. Management is, okay, here's the rules. Leadership is helping people develop.
Yep.
How about the fixed versus growth mindset sort of a model? Does that fit into your concept as well?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. And I think, more than anything else, I think what people miss is that point that your comfort zone actually it's actually not a safe place. It's, a fixed mindset is not a safe place. A growth mindset is where you're proactively controlling your own outcomes and your future. And again, if you work with the right people, you have the right support system, you go into it the right way, there's a way to do this, to stretch and grow, to extend that mindset without putting yourself into panic or into very high risk situations.
So staying away from entrepreneurship is probably an important point in that way as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I am I've done a lot of innovation in my career. Entrepreneurship has always, if there's something that, because I think I have the capabilities to do it on paper, I think I have the education, the drive. It's actually something that I don't know if I would probably say I do for me, it seems too risky. It's something that I've never really pursued. I think it all kicks around in all of our heads from time to time. I also wasn't brought up in really that kind of family. I wasn't brought up by entrepreneurs. So I think the way you're raised probably colors that. But yeah, for me personally, that's an example where entrepreneurship is probably panic zone. And as a child, I didn't have a good model who, could help me realize that, that's actually there's a way to do that. That's, where I could utilize my skills in that way and not throw myself into panic mode.
So you talked about childhood and where and the way you were raised. I know you're living in the Pennsylvania Lehigh Valley now. I assume staying out of your comfort zone, you've moved around quite a bit over the years?
Yeah, but always in the Northeast. So, yeah, I've gone to other regions, enjoy it, but I guess just the pace of life in the Northeast, you understand what I mean, Ed. So, grew up in New Jersey.
I'm an impatient Yankee. Maybe not quite as much as Jersey or especially Philly, but from the Boston area, we're pretty impatient, pretty brusque.
There you have it. So I grew up in southern New Jersey, and if you drew a line between Philadelphia and Atlantic City, you would drive through the town. Not a whole lot of reason to stop there, but you've probably been through it. And my goal growing up was to just get out of New Jersey. that's what I wanted to do. I ended up going to college about 5 miles over the border in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. So I just barely made it out. So maybe that's an early example of taking a small step into the learning zone. I got to get out of Jersey, but I only went 5 miles past the line.
All right. So you make this point about the comfort zone essentially always contracting, and that it's not safe to just retreat your comfort zone. We seem to be in a time now when change is accelerating. And so I guess my question is, does the velocity of the comfort zone contraction increase as an inverse function of the rate of change?
Yeah, I suppose it would. And I think the most important thing is even if the velocity is increasing, it is a gradual thing where you don't notice it every single day. So It is like diet and exercise and your own health, right? If you don't have good habits, you won't recognize it on a daily basis, but then one day you'll wake up and realize, oh my gosh, I've got this health issue, or, I'm overweight, or I can't do something that I used to be able to do. So I think that is the scariest thing about it is it's just going to hit you one day, and you don't get daily feedback that you're at risk of things collapsing on you. But it is always happening. You just, if you're not self-aware and proactive about it, you'll get surprised by it.
And a really interesting thing, you say proactive. And what's clear to me as I look at your career trajectory, the things that you do in work, the things I know about you personally through our friendship and the activities we've done together, you are absolutely proactive. I mean, you're a scientist with significant credentials. You've been an application scientist. You're a salesman, certified as a professional sales leader by the National Association of Sales Professionals. You're a marketer, specifically a product marketer with 15 years of experience. So I assume that this has been quite deliberate on your part and proactive as you've moved in these different areas, expanding your learning zone. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. So I think we can all look at our professional records, and you could paint one picture where you say, I made these steps throughout my career, and this was the plan. This is how I did it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's to some extent true. But for me, I think the root of it is kind of a naturally curious person. I have an upbringing that is really rooted in blue collar work. Like, that's who I grew up around. But I had this mind that led me into science and getting a PhD. And as I started to see the opportunities to use that technical expertise to solve blue-collar work problems, I became just really intrigued by that and realized that one of my unique skills is actually that ability to be a translator. It's the ability to work on really high-level technical stuff in a laboratory and get degrees in that, but then understand how to talk about it and how to apply it to the jobs that really run society. And the more and more I got exposed to that, that's what really drew me into the commercial path, from R&D to product management, where I'm actually defining what these products are going to be. And then in sales and marketing, you're taking responsibility for delivering those products to the end users of them. So while I could easily talk about that and say, well, that was my plan all along, but really what it was is I was just kind of following a trail of curiosity that aligned with the values that I was brought up with.
So you've got a growth mindset and kind of a natural empathy for folks in blue collar careers with a commitment to help them.
Yeah, that's it. And so, that didn't necessarily mean that I would go into the company that I work for or this exact role. Those are just they were the opportunities that I had a hand in creating for myself, through a growth mindset and, making good choices all along and making sure that I always had the opportunity to work on things that aligned with the values and the curiosity that I have.
So scientist, marketer, and sales. If you had to boil it all down, which one of the three do you think you really are most at heart?
Oh, it's the interface of the three. I can't say any of them.
Oh, come on. That's a cheating answer.
No, it's the interface, because I think, and I would say that I'm good at all of them.
Hmm.
I'm not the best at any. I can I intentionally go out and hire people who are much better at sales than I am. There are much brighter technical people. Maybe I had to learn that. Maybe that was part of the, a little bit of shock for me when I realized that I didn't know everything, because that's sort of what you're thought to think when you get a PhD, and then you enter the real world and realize, oh, there's actually a lot I don't know about. And so for me, it's the ability to be good at all of those things and work in commercial spaces where we're taking complex technical things and making them real and usable in the field. That's really, so there's no name for that. So, is it
Right.
science, marketing, or sales? Well, what I just described is really, it's encompassing all of that activity to deliver outcomes for an end user.
So you're a unicorn of sorts. It's an unusual combination in my experience. Which of those three disciplines, if you had to pick two of those three that you think are the most incompatible normally, which two do you think are most incompatible?
And I think with the PhD's level of science and sales are two pretty wide ends of the spectrum, because it's going to be naturally difficult to find somebody who has the ability to communicate and the comfort level to be able to operate in an academic or R&D world and then be equally as comfortable and capable in a sales environment. I think that is just from, because those two types of personas are usually wired in very different ways. I think.
And for people that try it, those that are self-aware to recognize the limitation on one side or the other is even a smaller group, I would say.
Yeah. So it takes a lot of, again, I go back to a lot of my upbringing, and, I'm raising two boys myself right now who are 14 years old. So, upbringing in that environment is certainly top of mind for me.
Right.
If you imagine, so what type of environment would create this kind of unicorn? It's, probably going to be an environment where it's grounded in a lot of humility. If both of my parents were scientists, I would probably just be working in the scientific field, right? But they weren't really in either of these. My father he worked in manufacturing. My mother was a secretary in our school system. So they had ordinary American jobs for the time, right? And suddenly I for some reason had this bright technical mind that led me into PhD science, but I was never defined by that. I was always given the space to, go, if that's what you're interested in, go get your PhD. But I never necessarily had a plan for what I was going to do with it. To me, it was a gateway to do something important that aligned with my values. And when I first started working in industry was when I realized, oh, this is actually a really interesting space to actually apply technology to what seems like ordinary work.
And you spoke of your dad's work as almost being something that was ordinary in the past tense. And hopefully what we're seeing is a resurgence of advanced manufacturing in the U.S. that recognizes the value to communities, the dignity of those jobs, the opportunity to care for a family, the weaving the fabric of a strong society. I think we're seeing an increase in respect for those kinds of jobs because they're critical.
I agree. My father was a glassblower. And so one of my earliest memories was that I don't know if it was actually called take your son or daughter to work day at the time. It was more, mom wasn't available and somebody had to look after me. So I showed up at the plant one day. I think that's really what happened. But, I didn't know I knew my father left at a certain time of day and came home the second time with his hands kind of dirty. He was a glass blower. And so I got to see that kind of work and what that looked like. And it was, I remember realizing, like, this is a craft. Like, this was scientific glass blowing. So, they were making high-end artisan level kind of stuff, and just, your ordinary beer drinking on the weekends kinds of guys. Every one of them had pictures of their kids on their desks. So yeah, that's what I remembered as a child. And then that industry collapsed, and my father was out of work through my teenage years, and bounced around. Never really found another craft. And so, yeah, my experience growing up was, hey, there's this, you can have a career like my father did, but then I saw it taken away. Right. And went off to college and left college with the assumption that kind of work was just gone. And it was actually with my current company, with Gentex, where I remember touring the facility and immediately realizing, like, wow, this looks and feels exactly like where my father worked. The helmet systems that we manufacture, they're being made by people who are terrific at a craft. And as soon as I saw that environment, I said, yeah, this is really a good place for me to work, because just it's still here, right? And I think that is increasing, like you say, because we service a lot of those types of customers, and we see it. We see the resurgence, and we see parents who are becoming more open to having their children go down that career path. Because I'm from the
and watching the news with the antics happening at colleges these days certainly encourages parents to think about that.
It does. The cost, the ROI is in question. And I'm from the generation where if your son or daughter didn't go to college, there was probably something wrong with you as a parent, or something wrong with them. And that is changing.
We'll talk more about Gentex in a minute, but as we're on the topic, do you all do anything for National Manufacturing Day each October?
Not specifically. We are part of so we participate in some industry groups. I'm on a board for an industrial resource center, there's one in every state, so they span the country. So we're actively involved in programs with them. So I'd say at a regional level, we're often participating with others in our region. A lot of the events that we do are more oriented around our customers and the markets we serve. So our primary business is in defense contracting. So, there is a lot that we do for, veterans affairs, military awareness, and things like that, because that really is our core market.
Understand. Now, you mentioned twin teenage sons. I know originally we met through the National Association of Corporate Directors, and you were moving in that direction. You've paused that because you get so much going on at work. You've got kids you're raising and everything else. But talk a little bit about your board aspirations, when you hope to jump back on that, what kind of roles you're looking for.
I still can't say that there's something specific. It's a curiosity. It's an
or that interest, learning zone.
Yeah, it's an interest in making sure that wherever my career goes, that late in that career I've set myself opportunities to have impact. And again, what I experienced with my father was he had a plan. It was really one plan. That industry collapsed, and he struggled to find footing for the rest of his life. So, part of my growth mindset is, I'm interested in how boards work. I'm on a nonprofit board right now, again, for that regional manufacturing organization. That may or may not be something that I do, but I want to make sure that I've got, enough tools and experience in my backpack so that, I don't stagnate unexpectedly later in my career. I think that sums up what a growth mindset looks like.
And you've got this interest in public speaking. Is that just to help you stay uncomfortable? Is that because of your commitment to teaching people in industry? What drives that public speaking interest?
Probably both. I mean, if I had a plan coming out of my PhD, it was to be a college professor, be a teacher. Do in part that's kind of all you see. So when you're studying to get your PhD, you're surrounded by other college professors. You can easily get the impression that that's the only thing you can do. Interestingly, I was never interested in working in a top flight research factory where it was more about the research and less about the teaching. If I was going to go into academia, it would have been at a smaller liberal arts, probably type of college where I would be teaching students who were more like the way that I grew up. So I got an opportunity to work in industry. the pay was certainly a lot better than starting out as a first-time professor. And that job and industry really aligned with what I was doing at a technical level and had a really interesting customer. So, but I think that teaching interest, has always been there. And so I think public speaking is a way for me to scratch that itch.
Well, I've got a feeling that before too much longer, you'll be adding the CSP or Certified Speaking Professional credential to your long list of credentials you already have. Obviously, you're on a rapid trajectory there.
That's it, yeah.
I heard you recently speaking with Derek Miller about leadership, and you touched on leadership early and the role of a leader to help people move through that learning zone without panicking. But you also posed an interesting theory that you've got a relatively narrow window to experiment and codify your leadership style before it gets locked in when, I think you said, maybe around 50. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I could talk about maybe the phases that I went through as a leader, and this will also maybe paint that picture of what it's like to transition from technical work into sales and commercial leadership.
Good.
So I think of my leadership development in these stages where as a PhD, the leader, the people that people look up to and choose to follow is usually the smartest person in the room. Like, so if you had to sum up this academic environment, it's a lot of people who really identify with their own intelligence. And you meet a lot of people where it's very important that they make it known that they're the smartest person in the room at all times.
Right.
So that is the leadership style that I left graduate school with. Now, I take my first job in industry, and one of the things that I'm doing very early on is I am troubleshooting an issue on the manufacturing floor. So I'm the youngest person, I've got the most letters after my name, and I go out to the manufacturing floor and I start acting like I know how to do their job better than they do. So imagine how that plays out. Yep. Now, again, I think this is where, and maybe this is another example of learning zone versus panic zone. If I didn't know how to interact with people like that, and again, I knew how to interact with manufacturing people. I grew up around it. However, I had all of this years of training to Dustin, make sure everybody knows how smart you are. That's essentially what I graduated with. And so, when those manufacturing people that I was, trying to, establish that I was better and smarter than them, when they obviously pushed back on that, if I didn't have that upbringing to fall back on, that would have been a panic zone moment, and I never would have gone to that floor again, right? But I was able to quickly realize, oh, wait a minute, this is a different game that I'm playing now, and I actually need to learn from these people because they know manufacturing and I don't. And then I got to figure out, we know there's a problem that needs to be solved, and I'm tasked with solving it. But if I don't actually gain an understanding of what they're doing to identify the problem, there's no way I can solve it. I can't just go in there and tell them you're doing it all wrong and you should do it this way, because that's not going to, one, I'm probably not going to be right, and two, they're not going to listen to me. I'm a 25-year-old kid. They're not even if I was right, they're not going to do it.
So through those kinds of experiences, you tried on different leadership hats, if you will, or different leadership methodologies or techniques. You watched people you thought were good leaders, watched people you thought weren't such good leaders. You codified that, mixed it all up, made it into your own. But what led you to this conclusion that that is a process that kind of terminates sometime mid-career?
I think if anything, it was seeing people that, I gave you an example of one lesson. I've had others that has ultimately led me to, the idea of servant leadership. If you want to put a name to it, it's that, as the one thing you have to be a leader is followers, and followers choose leaders. Leaders don't get to choose who follows them. Again, it's a difference between leadership and management. As a manager, I can have employees, and you
get an org chart.
They have to comply, right? Or there's steps you take, but you could be a manager and not be a leader at all. They may not be following you. They may just be in compliance.
Right.
And as I started to learn this and develop my leadership style, I found it interesting to meet individuals who were late in their career who either were never really exposed to any of this, or they were exposed to it and just didn't have the self-awareness or mindset, to take the experience and learn from it and develop. So, right. And again, because I interact with a lot of highly technical people, it's not uncommon to find somebody who, had the academic upbringing that I've had, found their way into industry, but never changed that style. Right. And they, I think it probably is something that if you haven't figured it out and learned that lesson, on the first half of your career, highly unlikely that your second half is going to show major behavioral differences.
I wonder if it's that the behaviors become ossified, or that somebody that lacks the self-awareness to adapt as they go along isn't going to become more self-aware later on.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I think that's right. And self-awareness is huge. I mean, it's a big part. And, I don't know if that's something that it's a hard thing to teach, I suppose. So I guess sure. If it wasn't part of your value system or something you learned young, then
right.
How would you teach somebody to be self-aware, or right. even if you could, self-awareness is one thing, but then there's the self-correction. It's, can you actually right. you meet people who say, yeah, I know I'm a jerk sometimes, and then they just keep on being a jerk because they can't self-correct.
Well, that's Southern Jersey, isn't it?
South and North.
So I pissed everyone off with that.
Yeah, I could get in trouble if I start debating South versus North Jersey. So.
All right. Obviously, you've got a number of years of marketing and product management, and you've had some big wins. You won a Frost & Sullivan Award for the Best New Product Innovation of 2020 for, I guess, what you call the specific product is a PureFlow 3000 Powered Air Purifying Respirator, or a PAPR. I don't know if you say the acronym or spell it out, PAPR or whatever, but what is a Powered Air Purifying Respirator?
So think of a Powered Air Purifying Respirator as you think of your home air purification system. We all bought these during COVID. You plug it into the wall. It's got a filter and a fan on it. Okay. So a powered air purifying respirator is really that type of technology, but you actually wear it on the body so that there is clean filtered air always available for you to breathe. So a conventional respirator that you might think of would be the tight fitting to the face with filters. You'd see it in Home Depot or Lowe's on a shelf. You might buy one if you're painting or doing any kind of sandblasting or anything like that. A powered air purifying respirator is just a higher end version of that actually feeds the clean air to you. And what happened during COVID is we had launched a new product just prior that was intended to be for industrial use. So if you were being exposed to silica dust, welding fume, paper mills are another example where there's just a lot of dust content in the air that needs to be filtered out before it gets to your lungs. That was our target market. And then when COVID happened, now there was all of this demand for any type of respiratory protection in the public health sector. And so we, like almost every other company that was making respirators at the time, pivoted to actually service that public health market. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of fortunate that we had just done a new product launch. So we had launch inventory built up. So we had a pretty stable supply chain going in, and then we're able to kind of survive longer than a lot of other companies and keep that supply chain intact. I mean, everybody ran out of respirators. We did too, but we probably stayed in the game, a bit longer than others, which was, one of the reasons for the recognition.
So speaking of that, tell us a little bit more about Gentex as a company, privately held, how old it is, what it does, what other kinds of products it makes.
So Gentex is a 130-year-old company, private, family-owned the entire time. Our primary business is in military helmet systems. So here you go. So that's the U.S. Army helicopter helmet that we manufacture at Gentex, and we are the only ones who designed that helmet for the U.S. Army. Really, our core technologies and know-how is around designing protective equipment that is worn above the neck. And so that can include a helmet, eye protection, that could be visors or eyewear, hearing protection from loud noises, ballistic shots, things like that, and then respiratory protection as well. So I started at Gentex on the aircrew helmet side of the business, doing fighter jet and helicopter helmet systems. And then about 5 years ago, took over our industrial line of business, where we're really taking the same technology, the same manufacturing process, and just applying it into industrial workplaces instead of the military environment where we've operated more historically.
Got it. So 137 years, you said?
130 years.
130 years. What generation now?
Fourth.
Wow.
There's some long
I love those stories. Yeah. I mean, we talk about resurgence of manufacturing. There's been manufacturing all along. It's just somehow, it dropped off the radar for many people. They just didn't think of it, like we already talked about. Speaking of thinking about or not thinking about, in product management, I think obviously there's a focus on the product, and sales, technical sales particularly, traditionally has been built around just vomiting up product details and product specs. But I'll for those that I didn't offend with my Jersey comment, I'll offend everyone else now when I say one of my mantras is that buyers don't care about your product or service. They just don't. They'd rather not get out of bed in the morning and have to think about buying it. What they care about is the outcomes, how it impacts their business. So how do you help your salespeople? How do you, as a very technical thinker, keep that information in reserve for the right application, the right time in the sales process, the right way to share it, but not just do a brain dump because you're so excited about all the technical stuff and blow up sales deals as a result?
Yeah. Well, let's illustrate this with my first sales call that I remember.
All right, here comes a good story.
We'll do a before and after, right? So mentioned entered industry after graduate school, happened to land with a company that was creating products using some of the technologies that I was involved with. So that's why it was an interesting jump to make. I was 2 weeks into the role, so I was really just getting grounded in what the products were. And they sent me to an industry event. Our primary customer for this particular product were firefighters and hazmat personnel. And these were handheld systems that could be used for identifying unknown chemicals in the field. Because the way this worked at the time is, this was right after anthrax mailings, for people who remember that. So envelope shows up at a federal building, there's white powder in it, and we don't know if it's a hoax or if it's anthrax. The only way to deal with that was you'd have to take the letter, bag it up, and send it to the CDC. The CDC would have to analyze it in a laboratory. And if you recall, there were federal buildings that were shut down for usually 2 weeks at a time when this was happening. So this company had created a product that could actually identify that chemical right on site. And so you take the 2 weeks all the way down to like 30 minutes to an hour to let people back in the building, because 99.999% of these were hoaxes. Very few were the real thing. So understood kind of that context of what this product did for the marketplace. They sent me to this conference, and really all I was told was, it's really an opportunity for you, Dustin, to start to get an understanding of who our customer is and how they use the product. So I thought, okay, this is great. And my first business trip, I was super excited about business travel. Now we've all learned what business travel is actually like. But at the time, I thought, wow, yeah, I get a free hotel and a meal, right?
Right.
So I was supposed to go with our sales manager and the product manager. The product manager had an issue with travel, so he ended up not making it to the event. I show up with the sales manager. We show up in the morning, meet, shake hands, and we enter this big conference room that's got about 300 or so firefighters and hazmat techs. And the organizer of the event says, the guys from Smith's, that was our company name, you're on. Go show them what you got. And the sales manager turned to me and he said, all right, Dustin, you're on. So I proceeded to give a sales pitch that was of the quality that you might expect from somebody who had only learned to give technical presentations in front of other PhDs. So I talked a lot about the science, the technology, about how the product worked. I even recall using terminology like experiment. We're going to run an experiment. But firefighters don't run, they run experiments in training. They don't run experiments when they're on site. So I was completely disconnected from this audience. I then got a question at the end of my presentation. Somebody asked about a certain type of feature. Does your product have this? And it was it was a wand that you could connect to the product that would basically, instead of having to sample a chemical, you could point it at the chemical and it would tell you what it was. So I got this question, and I knew that technically there's no way that that works. And so my answer that I had been trained to give was a very direct technical answer. I said, no. With no reframe, no redirect, no, well, what problem might you be trying to solve with this magical wand? Just a simple no, crickets, no follow-up from the audience. They didn't see any reason to ask me any more questions, so took care of that. I go sit down. Then our competitor gets called on in front of the room. The first thing they pull out is their wand, and they start demonstrating how this thing works, speaking the audience's language. To me, just a master class in how to deal with that kind of audience. And so I quickly recognized that, wow, that guy who I know doesn't have the level of technical experience that I have, just got in front of this audience and just wiped the floor with me. I was completely out of my realm. So panic zone, I suppose, right? But what I really enjoyed about it was the competitive aspect, the idea that here's our other competitor in this marketplace. And, the fact that there's this opportunity to go out and compete for business, right? I had never seen that in the academic world because, you're not exposed to that. Right. I'm a naturally competitive person. And so it sort of lit that spark to say, oh, this is actually something that, if I can figure out how to actually talk about this stuff to this type of audience, there's probably some interesting space to work in. But that was my first experience. And we probably encounter people who are in sales for many years, probably with that title of technical sales, who just continue to do what I did. They continue to focus on features. They don't meet the customer where they are. They don't use the right language. And I suppose if you're given a title of technical sales, you might feel like you have license to operate that way. And maybe certain companies can structure their where they're doing team selling. Maybe you can structure it a way where technical sales has its place, but it just does that element. Right. But yeah, if you're responsible for the wholesale end to end, and you identify with being a technical salesperson, my guess is you're struggling a bit, especially in the current environment, the way things are changing.
Yeah, but even the wand, that strikes me that's a feature. The standoff distance, not wanting to expose themselves, immediately to whatever the substance was, the ability to resolve it quickly because they've got calls that are stacking up, all of the what I would call business issues. Obviously, it's not business in the case of the fire department, but they've got their compelling priorities, and the device is only a means to the end of it. And so few salespeople can wrap their mind around that.
Yeah, and so that was a perfect example of, if I was asked that question again, I would either ask about, okay, what is the application, what is the problem, or I would, it'd probably be, I think it's clear enough because you just described it. I would probably say, so I think what you're looking to do with the wand is X, Y, Z. Here's how we solve that problem. And we actually, a couple of years later, maybe out of the shock of that experience, when I worked in R&D and transitioned into product management, we introduced a different and better way to solve that problem, right? So, it's an example where I did learn from it. I did take it to heart because this other company's wand, a lot of people bought them. They never bought it a second time because it didn't actually work. At a technical level, it just can't be done. But we developed a different way to solve the same problem. And that was, that's a good product management lesson, right? It's don't let the customer design the solution, right? So that customer felt they needed a wand. Really what they needed was a way to, you know, take this reading without having to physically handle the unknown substance.
Right. Yeah, someday offline, we'll exchange some stories. I had a brief stint over my career in explosive detection, and some of the markets, some of the competition, including a completely fabricated device that was made by a British guy, basically a golf ball retriever that he put a rheostat on and sold around the world for $25,000 or more for explosive detection, quote unquote. That really was just it was corruption. And it's amazing to see what happens in certain industries, but that's a topic for another day. You've been a product marketer for many years before you stepped into your current role, which has responsibility not only for product, but also most of the customer lifecycle, kind of, I would say, post-demand gen, product marketing, business development, sales, customer experience. So you've shared a lot of insights about how you've moved through your career and how your mindset helps you adapt. But talk about this specifically, because coming from the marketing side to get more involved in sales, to have responsibility for supervising sales, is a tough transition.
So when I joined Gentex in product management, the majority of our business was direct to government for our helmet systems. And then we also had applications in things like medevac or airborne law enforcement, where, again, it's an application. These were all in rotary wing helicopter aircraft. There was still this need for head protection, but the sales, it was more commercial sales rather than direct business with the government. And so there was this need to do demand creation, and these sales were through channel partners. So there was a channel management piece that was in the U.S. and internationally that wasn't really being looked after. We had a lot of people who were taking care of the government contracting. So I took responsibility for that channel management piece and sort of absorbed it into my product management role, which, if I were to describe how do people make these transitions, I think a great way to do it is, take my example. I was in product management. That's what I was being measured against. But there was this channel management job that also needed to be done. And so I just went and did it, which meant that I could develop channel and sales management experience, but not be wholly accountable for it. All my metrics were product, but I could learn how to start doing channel management in the course of doing that, but not be exposed. Because had I just gone into channel management and started being measured that way, I would have failed to meet those metrics because I had no training in how to do channel management. So I got to cut my teeth in it that way. We continue in my current role, our sales continue to go through channels. And I think one important thing has been, and I'm sure a lot of your audience also sells through channel partners. One thing that I learned was it's important to understand the end user of your product, which is typically where a product manager is taught to focus. But it's equally important to understand your channel partners' businesses, because to get channel sales to work, you need to be bringing value to the end customer and your channel partners at the same time. And the value to the channel partner can't just be the discount. There's got to be other things that you're bringing to the table to create value for the channel partner at the same time. That was something that sort of drove my evolution, where I started to learn that and then got to the point to say, I feel confident enough in my abilities here where now I can actually say, okay, I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in product management, and now I'm ready to move into sales management. Again, always staying around technical, highly engineered products, because I think stepping too far out of that, might be either risky or not as interesting to me. But, I think it is this natural evolution to be, responsible for the commercial results of a technical product line. That's really where it's culminated for me.
So channel is a great topic, and one that we definitely need to dive into. I find in the industrial space, there's kind of a love-hate relationship with channel. many companies need it because they need local stocking or they need local technical support, and it helps them deliver that. But they hate it because it feels like it's rarely aligned. It's not necessarily a mutually rewarding relationship. It's transactional. I think you touched on that with understanding the channel partner's business. But there's another aspect of it that makes it complex, and that I think you've talked about how you really have to make 3 sales. You have to sell the partner, you have to sell the end user. But take us through a little bit your model of successful channel sales.
Yeah, and I'll color this with, in this industrial space, it's a pretty mature market with a lot of players. There's a lot of strong incumbent activities from our competitors. And so if you find yourself in that environment, because I think if you have the best product and you have all the market share, then you have a lot of power over the channel activity, right? You can set the terms. I feel like most of your audience probably, and in the defense side of Gentex, we're often, in that position where end users are pulling for our product and our product only. In our industrial division, it is much more competitive. We are not as well known of a brand in that space within the market. So, if you're finding yourself in that environment, it's you have this need to attract and build awareness within that relevant base of channel partners. So you're selling and trying to get attention and mind share from them. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that you need to pick and choose the right channel partners. You don't really want to, I think if you're in the situation that we're in, you don't want to just sign up everybody and just be in everybody's line card.
Yeah, there's a lot that just spray and pray line cards.
Absolutely, and that's what you're going to run into. Yeah.
So how do you find the ones that want to be in the learning zone? I mean, I mentioned your podcast conversation with Derek Miller. I mean, there's an example of a distributor who started a branded podcast, obviously a very forward-thinking, creative sort of distributor, but that's unusual. Most just drop those line cards off at reception desk. How do you find the right people? How do you define your ideal partner profile?
Yeah, a big part of it, because our product is unique, and there's no other papper on the market that's like ours from a feature benefit standpoint. And you can immediately see that some channel partners, when they're presented with that, they see that as extra work. It's going to be harder for me to sell this. And you start to get a feel pretty quickly in these conversations. Right. Their line card's already full with things that end users are already asking them to buy. You then meet other channel partners who are often competing against distributors or channel partners that have a lot of established lines and a lot of installed base and market share. And the only way that they can really compete is by bringing unique value to their end users. So that's an immediate source of alignment, that you need a channel partner where bringing a unique, tailored solution to their end users is a key part of their strategy. I think some in your audience who are facing this will hear that and say, yeah, that's great, and we know those channel partners, but often those channel partners that are selling the uniqueness and that high level of service to customers, a lot of times those are your small local guys, right? So they've got high market share, but in a really small territory, right? Mm-hmm. And so you end up with this problem of, well, we could sign up 100 partners like that, but then we've got to manage a channel base of 100 small partners. So how do you cope with that? So I think what we found is that in the safety product marketplace that we operate in, there still are a lot of channel partners who are dedicated to workplace safety. They are dedicated to bringing unique value to their end users, and they have sizable market shares, right? They can give you that access to market. This is a space where there's certain types of products in this space that people can just go buy them online. And so, products of our category, they're up on Zorro, they're up on Amazon. But you're probably not going to buy our product that way. Right. And that means that our product solution really fits well with that channel partner who, they might have an online shop, I would say that's a good thing to have these days. But the end sale is probably not going through the e-commerce shop. The end sale is probably happening with one of their direct people face to face with an end user.
The transaction may be e-commerce, but the sale itself is face to face.
Yeah, maybe there's a research phase that's probably done online, maybe right. in that e-commerce environment. But yeah, because in safety product sales, the good channel partners, the good salespeople, they're really functioning like an advisor and a safety program consultant. And that's a face-to-face level service. I mean, you need to be with the end user, walking through their environment, seeing what the workplace hazards are to effectively facilitate that kind of sale.
So years of experience, understanding from the product side, understanding from the sales side, and an MBA. So you've got a lot of credentials, real world and academic around this. Based on that, what's your philosophy? Exclusive or non-exclusive representation agreements?
Yeah, I lean towards non-exclusive. Non-exclusive is kind of the norm in this industry. I'd say in our military side, you see more exclusivity. In industrial safety sales, tends to be more non-exclusive. But I think what's important for any company who's in our kind of situation is, again, choosing the right partners, not necessarily exclusivity, but having a limited distribution model where it's clear who is a partner and who might just be an order taker, right? I mean, you might have your part numbers and pricing in their system, but again, if you work with a lot of those order takers and one of your loyal partners is working on an opportunity and the customer puts it out for bid and they get undercut, that's going to undermine that network. So this balance that I described, where you might find that your most loyal channel partners are a lot of small guys without a lot of market share, and it makes it hard to scale your business. And so you then say, well, we probably need to be in Granger so that we can actually participate in these RFQs. But then those two things are going to compete with one another. So that balance of how do you have a channel network that's big enough to give you the market access that you need, but is still, again, not exclusive, but you don't have people just fighting over the same turf and stepping over each other. That's right. That's I think the best way to operate in the market that we're in, that we've seen working well for us.
So that's a model question. Then thinking about salespeople, I think you've spoken in the past about identifying three kinds of salespeople. We talked earlier about technical, and that's the one that traditionally stands my hair on end. But what do you see as being the three types of salespeople and pros and cons?
Yeah, so you've certainly got the technical side, and I think it's sometimes companies with technical products may think that's all they need, right? So you then have the account management piece, which is, again, and I think what we're after in our type of business model is those account management skills are so important because they apply to end user and they apply to channel partner.
And by account manager, you're using that term to mean land and expand. Once you're in there, you're expanding the relationship. Yeah,
we don't have like we don't have like business development and then sales. Like there's never a handoff. Our team, you have a territory that you own that business. And if there's a particular type of behavior or philosophy that I'd say is most important for that, it's, I think, a successful account manager of that type, they need to find value in having variety in their work, not having every single day be the same. So what our account managers, and we call them, they're sales managers, that's what they're titled as, but they are equally responsible for end user relationships and channel partner relationships. And they have to make both work together, because you need to drive the end user awareness, but then you need to have the channel partner engaged to pull the sales through. And so they all have a book of business. So they need to be flexible enough to understand that on any given day, I will be spending different proportions of time on end user or channel. some level of technical competence, but we don't want them to be technical experts by any means, because we know how that can play out. But they need to be competent in talking about the technology. But really what it boils down to is they need to be able to understand workplace hazards, talk intelligently about safety programs, make recommendations for the right products. In our industry, if you're a salesperson in safety sales and you either intentionally or unintentionally recommend the wrong product and sell the thing that's not appropriate for the workplace hazard, you will not survive in this industry. Like that, right. That just gets known. And
it sounds like you shouldn't survive in the industry.
You shouldn't, right? So I think the industry actually probably does a pretty good job of self-correcting. Those people can, they manage their way out of the industry. And I think if your orientation is get the sale at any cost, you're probably not going to choose to work in safety anyway. Like, you're probably going to find other industries where it's maybe easier to do that, because selling safety is more work than other industries, I would imagine. And so if your goal is just to ring the bell and maximize the number and not driven by any other motive, then why would you work in the safety industry? I don't even know why you would be here.
You described earlier, when I asked you to pick whether you were scientist, sales, or marketing, you said you're kind of an avatar at the intersection. And that intersection is, I think, increasingly important, because as we look at the way buying journeys have evolved, buyers jump back and forth. I mean, if anyone's seen Gartner's graphic of the long, hard slog, I think they call it, that shows the buying journey just so convoluted and chaotic, back and forth between areas that were traditionally marketing and traditionally sales. And they don't care. They just want the answers to the questions they have at any moment. And they don't care if they're talking to sales or marketing. They just want the answers. How have you helped your team, because you bridge those? How have you helped your team manage that?
I think it requires, and I also think those customers, unless you can do it really efficiently and seamlessly, they don't want to hear from a different person every time. At least that's not what I've experienced. They want to know that they're talking to somebody who has a handle on the entire book of business that they're representing. So it's a requisite level of product understanding, a requisite level of understanding of the customer's environment, your good selling skills, right? I think we're relatively small team. So even if we wanted to chunk those up and have different people play those different roles, we don't, I would expect a lot of your audience doesn't have the head count to do it that way. Right. So you need to get, probably, like myself, that, my effectiveness is being good at all of these facets, not necessarily being so specialized in any one of them. And, I think an effective team of a size like ours in the industrial environment, needs to take on that identity where they're competent enough to answer the customer's needs, wherever they are in that journey. I think that's what builds the credibility and the loyalty, and why that customer will then, when they have a new problem, they'll think to call us, because they value the expertise that we bring.
On a more personal note, you're juggling a lot. You've got a lot of work responsibility. You said you're a dad to twins. I know from conversations we've had, your wife works and travels for work. So I'm guessing you don't have a ton of free time. But when you do, how do you recenter yourself?
Make sure I get some exercise in. That's a big one. So
what do you enjoy?
And it almost doesn't matter. I think it's just movement and being outside. I play a little bit of golf when I can. Sometimes it can be a workout. Sometimes it can just be a walk around the block. I think those are the things that, having that daily habit to make sure that there's a little bit of time carved out for all of that is important, because those are the kinds of things that you could wake up one day, and if you haven't had those habits, you'll get shocked.
Speaking of habits, what's your daily workflow? What's most effective? Are you one of these people that jumps into email in the morning and cleans it out, or do you ignore email till noon and focus on big thinking?
I do emails in the morning, particularly because I have a global team. I often wake up with overseas emails from UK or other regions. So, the morning they're halfway through their day. So
Right.
knocking those out in the morning. I'm not a very structured or really a process oriented person. Maybe that's one of the things that drew me out of technical work. So I tend to every day, I have a daily plan of the things I want to get done, but the order in which I do them is not something that I fix. I know a lot of people who do that. They have that routine. I always have a to-do list, so I know what I need to get done. But on any given day, I will do those things in different orders. And I think that's just probably just a part of how I'm wired. There's other people that are wired differently from that probably have a much more structured day.
Speaking of structure, we mentioned earlier that we're going to come back to the Jolt effect. And the Jolt effect offers some interesting look at structure of buying journey and structure of sales process based a lot, I guess, some of the changes in the buying habits include information overload, growing buying teams, but also risk aversion. And Daniel Kahneman, who got his Nobel for research into behavioral economics, concluded that we really feel the pain of a loss substantially more than the boost from a win. So people are afraid of making mistakes. There's that asymmetry that we talked about earlier, kind of between innovation and security. And at the end of the day, buyers often chicken out. They don't want to say that. They say, oh, well, we don't have enough time, or we don't have enough resources, or the current solution has actually improved. It's not the problem we thought it was. But even often when they know they need to change and want to change, they get paralyzed with a concern that the change won't go well. And your product is in an interesting position because it's not just a business and reputational risk, but also a health risk. So it's not something that people can easily push aside. You can't just discount health risk because you don't feel like making a change. How do you see that risk playing into the decisions that people make?
It's so often the customers that we're pursuing, they have a workplace respiratory hazard, and they are usually in compliance. So they usually have a respiratory safety program because OSHA
in compliance, you mean with government regulations?
Yeah, and in compliance with OSHA. So OSHA has regulatory oversight of this product space that we operate in. So for us, it's usually we're going to be usually switching a customer from using one type of solution into using ours. And we approach those customers. Often they haven't heard of us. That maybe they know Gentex, but they don't know that we're also in this new market because we're not as well known or established in it. And we're approaching them with a product that doesn't look like anybody else's. So that creates an opportunity to throw up a lot of risk signals. It can create a lot of interest and curiosity, but I think, it raises the risk level as well because, I don't know who these guys are. They have a product that, it's got the certification stamp on it. So I guess, it meets the regulations. So the product must work, but who are these guys? Are they a startup? Do they really understand our market? Is this thing really designed the right way, or is it just designed to pass the tests that are done in the lab?
Right.
I think, when we're in that phase of the process, it's where we need to talk about who we are as a company. We need to talk about our history, our track record. We may, in certain cases, will say, well, we've made military helmet systems for 70 years, and now you can get that know-how and experience in an industrial powered respirator. Mm-hmm. So we have the opportunity to position ourselves as, we're not a startup. We know what we're doing. We're established. If you buy our product and you need support over the next 3 years for that product, we're not going away. We're going to be here. Right. So that's a lot of the upfront conversation that's sometimes had directly with a customer, but it's really infused within our marketing and what you'll see about us on our website, social media, and other promotions. It's kind of introducing this unique product, but at the same time paying attention to that risk level that our customer will typically be on the more risk averse side of things.
Right.
So they may be interested, but it's harder for them to fully commit to a type of product that they've never seen before. right? That you're gonna run into some obstacles.
You, in late 2022, you joined an executive reading group that I had organized, and together we read the Jolt Effect book by Matt Dixon and Ted McKenna. We got together for weekly conversations. As you were just talking about the buyer risk aversion and some of what you're doing to reassure them, I was hearing some echoes of the Jolt Effect. What were your big takeaways from that book and those ideas?
My personal experience, yeah, a lot of it I had learned in product management. So there were a couple things in that, Joel, and we can go through the letter. So I'm actually going to start with O, because the O was offer recommendation. So if you see a customer that's getting stuck in an indecision, offering a recommendation is a way to help them out of that. And I think that's something that I've used my technical background throughout my career to be able to, when I'm in that situation, I can offer a recommendation based on my technical depth, and it can be credible. In safety sales, that is often what you're doing, because you're taking this position as an advisor or a consultant. Offering a recommendation is often a very natural part of the process. So that part I said, yeah, that's familiar. I think we do a lot of that. I think the book also mentions never trashing a competitor. And that's another thing that is like, our industry understands that, because often we'll be in a workplace looking at things and we'll recognize, well, we don't actually have the right product. And my team will recommend, they'll say, well, you actually need this company's product. And because again, if you try to push the wrong thing on a customer, you're going to be out of this industry. So the offering a recommendation and not talking bad about competition, that was something that I think is naturally done in our industry. The L, the limit exploration, again, as a product manager, I had seen this, because often when there was a trial that then turned into the endless cycle of retrials, I was usually the person, because as a product manager, usually stepping into that, I had already learned to sort of know when to dial that back.
Right.
An interesting thing, I'll go back to the when I worked for the chemical identification product company, because the next one, the T, taking risk off the table, I think this company had just a phenomenal example of this. So we had this chemical identifier, and if you took a pure substance, so if it was a single chemical that was spilled or pouring out of an envelope, and you put it on our analyzer, you would get that answer close to 100% of the time. I mean, that was a very easy thing for the technology to do. But if you presented it with a mixture of chemicals, that's when it would get tripped up, because that's just a hard thing for the technology to resolve. So we had a competitor who was investing tons of money into software and algorithms that could tease out the parts of these mixtures and give you that accurate answer. Our approach was we were investing in that, but we knew, like, hey, there's always going to be a limitation. You can mix up a cocktail stuff that no instrument's ever going to be able to identify. So what we had set up was a service that we called Reachback. And this was a subscription service where if you bought our product and you're on scene, you do a measurement and you get an inconclusive answer, we made it easy for you to take the data file and send it to one of our experts. And some of our experts were PhD scientists, other were people that we had trained up. 24/7, somebody was going to be available to look at your data and then get on the phone with you and talk you through our interpretation of the results.
Wow.
Perfect example of taking risk off the table, and a great way to get an off ramp when somebody's in the trial loop, because you could tell that customer, look, if you just want to keep trialing mixtures, I can tell you what that result's going to be. Sometimes we're going to get it, and sometimes we're not, because it just can't be done. And our competitor is going to show you the same thing. We've got this service where when you get that inconclusive result, you can very quickly get the data to us, and within an hour, you're going to have an answer that tells you enough about what you need to do. Still might not be able to tell you what the exact chemicals are. That often doesn't matter. You're going to put on the same gloves. You're going to put it in the same kind of waste drum. And that was hugely successful for that company, and customers loved that service. Sometimes they even used it. If we gave them an answer, they would just call for peace of mind, just to validate, here's what I saw. Can you tell me, give me a final look to let me know this is correct. So Yeah, I think the limit exploration, taking that and tying it into taking risk off the table, because if you're going to end the trial, then I think, okay, we know we can end the trial, but then, what are we offering the customer now? It's like, you're not going to learn anymore by trialing. These risks are there, and here's our approach to taking those risks off the table. For me,
I think the thing, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump to the J, because I think that's the one where I learned the most. What did you have on the taking risk?
It wasn't on taking risks. I was going to just say at a high level, the thing that jumped out most at me about the book is that the sales technique that I've had hammered into me, that when somebody begins to waver, you need to go back to FOMO and hammer on FOMO, has been demonstrated through their research and the data to actually be significantly counterproductive. And that was, that's a muscle that's been built for a long time, and it's a hard habit for me to break. And sometimes I catch myself consciously aware of what I need to do, and sometimes I revert to that habit, and it's frustrating. But understanding that transition from FOMO to FOMO and treating them differently struck me as probably the most important takeaway from the book.
Definitely was, and being in a market where there's our customer has to have products in a safety program. So we're beyond that status quo. It's not like we're telling customers you don't have a compliant safety program and you need to work with us to get one. It's usually so we're beyond that point. But in other industries, It might be like you're trying to get the customer to go from one current state to a completely different future state. To some extent, we're just giving them a better solution to a problem that they're already addressing in some way. Just for the Jolt effect, the thing that I took away the most from the book was the J of Jolt, the judging the indecision. Coming from a product management background, I had the view that we've got a product, we understand the features and benefits, we can define the ideal customer. And if we're putting this product solution in front of the ideal customers, we're going to close those deals. Like if the product fit is there, product fit is always going to win, and you're going to be able to close the deal at some point. But then I was realizing as I read the book, I said, wow, there are actually some of these deals that I was committing to and putting into our budget and setting the expectation this is going to close within a certain time frame, and it wasn't happening. When I started to look back through that lens and say, well, was this customer even capable of making decisions? Yeah, there were obvious things in there. And I think what we've gotten better at now is I think we're better forecasters for our business because we're more tuned in, or me as the person who's often ultimately signing off on that number and presenting it to my CEO. We understand better, okay, which of these customers have a normal, productive buying process that we can take them through, usually led by the health and safety professional. I mean, that is kind of usually the ones driving. But if you see a process that suddenly looks very different from that, it's recognizing in our business that this could be, there's signs here where it might ultimately close, and some of those deals did close, but this is going to run through a different playbook that is not conventional. And we have some of those customers where I can tell you from a product management standpoint, our product fit was dead on. They need our product, and they told us they needed it, and they didn't buy it.
So more rigorous opportunity qualification. You're using a scorecard that takes some of that J into account as you forecast. Yeah,
I think it's something that I think there's opportunities to continuously improve in that. And
sure.
When we get in trouble is probably when there's a buying process that differs from the norms within our industry. I think that's when you can get tripped up. So sometimes sometimes our product is used by union workers, and you think about, well, that's a factor, right? So my sales team never thought to should we be talking to union leads about our products, right? That's not something that people in our industry, you think, well, health and safety is going to drive it. They're going to say what's used in their facility. Well, what if the union workforce doesn't agree with that and isn't willing to use the product?
Or what if they really want it? Kind of the converse.
Or the other way, can you actually create the demand? And
right.
So there's a lot of dynamics when you get, and it usually applies the bigger the deals are, right? So your smaller deals, usually the health and safety person is making the entire decision. Bigger deals, you have to be aware that there may be these other buyers in the committee who are normally not paying attention to this, where now they might be, and you want to be adjusting your forecasting to account for that.
So I remember as we were reading that book and having those weekly meetings, you were consistently showing up. You'd done the reading. You were prepared for conversation. You brought points. You even offered a case study to the group. So I know that you're an active learner. Where do you go for other professional growth? What podcasts or blogs or YouTube channels do you find are helpful?
I like what you're doing, so I'll give you a plug there. So your,
Thank you. That was not solicited.
Very helpful.
But appreciated.
There's somebody I'll recommend, April Dunford. If you've seen her work on positioning, she's written 2 books. She's got a podcast. It's a really simple read, very digestible format, easy to put into practice. So I found that very, very valuable. I've got a rotation of books. I'm typically an Audible person. I'm on the move enough that it's hard for me to sit and get through a book by reading it efficiently, but I'm in the car or traveling enough that Audible's a godsend for me. So I've got a...
What speed do you listen at?
I think I'm 1.1.
1.1.
Yeah, I go 10% above the... I haven't tried more.
Got it. Back to the case study, I know since we had that reading group and you shared kind of a case study with the group, you now actually have, and I think another example of stretching to your concentric learning circle, you and your team have implemented a program based on some of the Jolt learnings. Are you at liberty to talk at all about the process and the internal debate and any early results that you've seen?
Yeah, so this was basically a try risk free. So, and it's an example of, the customer is asking for trial, and it's time to get off that ramp. These are products that are worn by the person in dirty environments. So they're going to sweat them up. They're going to get dirty. So, they're typically not returnable, right? So, we now, for the right type of customer now, we've got this opportunity where you can try it on. If within 30 days it's not working for you, you can return it less a processing fee. And so it gives our sales team a tool to put on the table if trialing isn't the appropriate thing to do. Mm-hmm. Some of the debate that went into it, I'd say the biggest thing was, is this type of program, do you enable your sales team with it so they've got it in their back pocket and they can use it when needed? Or do you promote it and put it out there in order to attract new customers that maybe aren't in your pipeline? And so, that was a debate for us. And I think with any type of program that you might conceive where you're taking risk off the table, you're probably taking on some amount of business risk by doing that, right? Because usually there is the potential for a cost. Sure. In our case, it could be a return, but there's many other. The reach back example, somebody calls you every single day, right? And there was no cap on that. You didn't pay by the minute. It was an annual subscription, so people could abuse it. We have chosen to promote it out there, and the thought was, well, let's get it out there. Let's run the experiment to its fullest, right? Let's not put bounds on it. If it attracts a lot of customers and we're bringing in a lot of interest, then great. Like that's always what we're trying to do with marketing anyway. What's the risk? The risk would be that it starts attracting the wrong customers. You start taking a lot of orders from people where your product isn't really going to be the right solution and your return rate goes up. That's the potential risk. The thing we're doing is we're very closely tracking the program. So we know who the customers are. We know how they found us. We're tracking, if they keep the product, do they continue to buy after that? Because that would demonstrate a lot of ROI. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I'm watching the most is, what do these customers look like? So the ones who are taking advantage of the program, is it starting to veer off of our ideal customer, which could introduce risk? Or are we actually still taking orders in just at a higher rate from the same customers that we've always been pursuing? Because
and do you have results that you can share?
Customer, it's a big accelerant if you're bringing in your ideal customers faster.
Sure, absolutely. Is it too early, or is it proprietary, or do you have results that you can share to give us an early indication of what you're finding?
So far, so good, right? So I think we're seeing it's bringing in the right type of customers who I think are the good fit. And again, if you think about our customer, why would they take the time to trial something that they think is very highly unlikely to work, right? So why would they go through that effort? So I think it is,
right.
It's probably inevitable that you're not going to veer too far off of your ideal. At the same time, we define an ideal customer, but that changes and shifts. You learn, you find new applications over time. So I wouldn't overreact if we started to see, well, here's this new type of customer that we've never really thought about before who are actively involved in the program. Well, that might actually be a new application. It might be something that expands our definition of our ideal customer. So not overreacting, if we were to see a deviation from the norm. So I think it's an experiment and we're measuring it. So we're going to be able to understand the results. I think that's the most important thing whenever you're going to take on any type of new marketing program or initiative like this. Even if it makes us nervous, if we can measure its results, then we can make a good decision on do we continue, pivot, or end.
And did your channel embrace this as a tool to help them win more sales, or did they complain because it raised the administrative hassle they'd have to deal with?
No, I think we're seeing them embrace it. And again, I think why would a channel partner really be interested in selling our product to a customer who's very likely to return it, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about the bad scenarios and the bad outcomes that could come from this, you can maybe get yourself into that mindset. But then again, who has the time to really do that? And who really wants to be involved in processing returns? Like if you didn't think it was going to work for you, you're probably just not going to expend the effort. So I think channel partners see it the same way. Like they don't, processing a return from a customer, if that's viewed by the customer as, well, the channel partner encouraged me to buy this and it was a waste of time, well, that doesn't help their relationship with that end user easily. So I'd say it took a while for my team. Maybe I was more on the risk averse side of this, and it took some pushing from my, we're doing this in North America. Our sales director for North America, it was his concept. Maybe took him, I've come around. Yeah, he had to do some good selling on me to get it out there, but I eventually got there.
We can't have a conversation without quickly talking about AI. You mentioned it earlier, how it can be a threat to people in their comfort zone, but any particular thought you have on how AI could be used to support sales channel, for instance?
Yeah, I think it augments, doesn't replace. Certainly in this industry, I think there will always be a need for the face-to-face and seeing the customer's environment firsthand. We're starting to use it for just generating first cuts of content in marketing. Even in our marketplace, a lot of times, if we're talking about safety regulations, right, those documents exist in OSHA. So it's more common in our industry that we're just pointing to that because you never want to take a regulation and try to say it in different words, because that's risky. So I think there are elements, but probably, our industry of safety and regulated products, I would expect that we would be on the later end of full adoption. And I don't see this type of industry ever getting to the point where AI is really obsoleting the need for salespeople. I think having your eyes and ears in the customer's work environment is always going to be a critical part of our sales process.
Look into your 5-year crystal ball for me. What's the biggest risk that businesses face that they have yet to reckon with?
I think it's businesses where we're seeing more manufacturing activity in the United States. It is to be globally competitive. It does need to be more automated than it was in the past. The risk that I see, and that technology is out there, I think we will see in the next 5 years plenty of companies adopting automation and bringing it into their facilities. And I think there is a good support system to get the automation stood up and working. The risk that I see is once it's installed and your installer is off to other things, how do you maintain and sustain that investment over time? Because most of our companies don't have automation engineers on staff who can troubleshoot and maintain. And if you wanted to go hire those people, there's not a lot of them out there because our educational system hasn't been building that skill set so much. So if I think 5 years out, it's the automation projects that probably took a little longer to pay off than you hoped. And then now you're getting some ROI, but now you're having to deal with sustainment of those. And how are you going to get the sustainment down? I think we'll figure out how to install it.
Deterioration of the OEE is a common problem. I mean, if it breaks, then they get somebody to fix it. But if it just gradually degrades in performance, that's something that I think a lot of companies don't necessarily measure, much less address.
Yeah, and I think, and where would you go right at that point? Right. So that's going to be a scarce skill set for the people 5 years' time who really know how to fix this stuff.
All right, how about the biggest opportunity you see in your crystal ball?
Well, I think it is, again, speaking about U.S. manufacturers, I think it's getting better at articulating their value. I think the capability is here. It will always come at some level of premium, right? It's like our cost base here in free world markets is always going to be higher. And the other side of automation is you can put automation anywhere. So there's no reason you can't put automation in lower wage areas. And so I think the challenge of, how do you get sales without discounting as a manufacturer that's got a relatively high cost base? You have to be, much more effective at communicating your value and, getting your customers to understand it and pay for it. And, the reason you do the work that you do is you recognize that the sales and marketing capability is too often overlooked in companies like these. But if you had to think about, where's the fact that it's so often overlooked means that there's got to be a lot of upside to companies who choose to invest in it.
Enormous competitive advantage. They'll leapfrog ahead of their peers. You're absolutely right about that.
Absolutely.
All right, folks have listened to you. Knowing that you're a speaker, they may want you to come and speak at their company events, or they may just want to connect with you and stay in touch and learn from your periodic musings. What's the best way for them to do that?
Connect on LinkedIn and follow me there. You'll see posts that I like. I'm not creating a ton of content. Again, I'm busy with work and family. But if you look at who I follow, the things I like, getting more involved in your network through seeing the guests that you have on this podcast. So yes, let's start with LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me.
All right, and I'll drop your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So as we wrap up here, kind of take us home, Dustin, I'd call you maybe a professional polymath. So with that set up, you call yourself an intersectional guy, but give us your 30 seconds of wisdom for industrial manufacturers today. Well,
I'm going to pivot on you. I'm going to surprise you, Ed. So I know you've talked about college athletics with a few of your guests. We didn't touch on it, but I was a college baseball player. So maybe there's
I didn't realize
something
that.
There. Yeah. So
another data point in this data set.
Another data point. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't want to miss the opportunity to add that data point for you. And
thank you.
I think we've touched on a lot with industrial manufacturers. I think the opportunity to making this investment in being more intentional about your sales and marketing activities, we've seen the payoff. I think it is an opportunity, and the people who move on this earlier than others have the opportunity to have a nice protectable competitive advantage for quite some time.
All right, there it is. There's a mic drop moment. What a fabulous conversation. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for sharing all your wisdom with the audience today, Dustin.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Really enjoyed it. Thanks
Absolutely.
For doing this.
All right, everyone listening, if you got to have found value in this, various nuggets along the way, don't forget to like and share and comment, even give the podcast a review and help others find it and benefit from it as well. Thanks for joining us today.